Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I am your host, Jay Taylor. Well, one of the topics that I discussed with David Stockman in my February 23rd interview with him was how easily the American people are manipulated by statist propaganda. He agreed and then responded by noting how that propaganda ties into the unending desire for warfare spending by the military-industrial complex, and how that is leading America down the path towards bankruptcy in the not-too-distant future, he fears. Here is what David had to say about propaganda and how it is leading Americans to mindlessly head down the path of financial destruction.
You have just an enormous groupthink here. Yes. That's incredible to behold. It does function basically to the advantage of the deep state, the military-industrial surveillance complex. And what I wrote in this article, which you just mentioned, and I don't like to beat my own drums here, but it's well worth going into because I not only exposed the sham of this indictment and the fact that, these are 20-something-year-old unemployed people in St. Petersburg who were hired to, crank away on keyboards 12 hours at a time, sending out nonsense messages. But the thing is, the Democrats now have seized on that because they've been beside themselves trying to explain how the worst candidate in history of a major party, Donald Trump, beat their candidate. Right. Okay? Right. And so they've now gone off the deep end with this hysteria about Russian meddling because they're trying to explain the inexplicable. But that is really worrisome and dangerous because it means a carte blanche check for the military-industrial complex in dollars in the budget and in running room on policy. And so the one thing that I was hoping Trump could do, which was to go to Geneva, meet with Putin, and have a rapprochement and say, we'll stay out of your neighborhood in the Ukraine if you stay out of Mexico, which I'm sure he would agree to. And Syria is none of our business, and if the government there wants you to help them stabilize the place and get rid of the radical jihadists, more power to you. Sure. It would have changed the world, but my point is, we're going broke. That $1.2 trillion of debt that I mentioned for the coming year is not happening at the bottom of a business cycle, downturn. It is happening 10 years into a recovery. Incredible. Which is, at 6% of GDP. It's incredible. And sometimes when you've had the long experience that some people have had, I've had, I was sitting there in early 1982 when we were in a deep recession. The deficit soared out of control, inadvertently, because, the tax cut was too big, defense increase got out of hand. But we were facing, at the bottom of a recession, a 6% of GDP deficit, and we were terrified. Yeah, at the bottom. At the bottom. Now, here they are at the top, 10 years in, 104 months in, and they're consciously, intentionally widening the deficit to 6% of GDP, and that's insane because a year or 2 or 3 years down the road, we're going to get a recession, and then the revenue will dry up, and the thing will soar beyond management. So, this is dangerous, but here's the reason, and that is the Republicans are afraid to take on entitlements because they'll get demagogued by the Democrats. Right. The Democrats were afraid to really throw their bodies in front of this tax bill because they thought, it would be popular to give away, to lower taxes. And so they did nothing. And then both sides get together and say, if you want to raise defense by $80 billion a year, the Democrats said that's fine with us, but we got to raise domestic spending by $70 billion. Okay, so you now have no constituency for fiscal rectitude. None. Exactly. It's gone. Yeah. And the only small force we had in Congress, the Freedom Caucus in the House, they ended up in this deal they made to avoid the shutdown a couple of weeks ago. I said in one of the blogs I wrote, they took him out behind the Capitol and shot him dead politically, okay? Mm-hmm. Because that's really what the Republican leadership, McConnell in the Senate and Ryan, who I think is the greatest fiscal flake to come down the pike in a long time, did in the House. And so now you have this fiscal situation at this late stage in the business cycle, running out of control, at the same time that you have a posse of Keynesians in the Eccles building trying to reload their dry powder by shrinking the balance sheet and driving bond yields straight up. It's a recipe. It's a recipe for a conflagration like we haven't seen.
I would like to remind you that you can hear my entire interview with David Stockman on the podcast page at jtaylormedia.com.